Hello everyone. In my last video about John 17:5, I touched on several things pertinent to that verse, especially contextual facts which are pertinent to a proper understanding of John 17:5. And what I was trying to do in that video is provoke your thinking, and to just remind you that these contextual facts are actually there and how they should affect your understanding of John 17:5. In this video, what I'd like to do is sort of review those contextual facts that we looked at in the last video, but expand on that. And additionally, to move us one step closer to a correct understanding of the words of Jesus at John 17:5. So let's start here. This is the verse we started with in the last video, the New American Standard Translation of John 17:5. And I don't think I need to talk about what Trinitarians see when they read this verse. I think everybody knows. One thing that we need to do, obviously, is to take note of this. Verse 1, glorify your Son. Verse 5, glorify me. He's obviously talking about the same thing. And because of that, we should therefore also take note of this. Father, the hour has come. What does that mean exactly? And what does John tell us about that exactly? And one of the things that Jesus had just said is, behold, an hour is coming and has come. Okay, there it is again. For you to be scattered, each to his own, and to leave me alone, and yet I am not alone, because the Father is with me. And then Jesus says one more thing, and then we get John 17:1. So the disciples scatter and leave him alone when he is arrested and crucified. You strike the shepherd, and the flock is scattered, right? At John 16:32, it should be pretty obvious that the hour in question refers to his execution and death. And I talked about that in the last video and went over that. Additionally, there's John 12, which we looked at in the last video. The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. And if we keep reading, it's obvious that this is talking about his death on the cross. Now my soul has become troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? That's an obvious reference to his death on the cross. But for this purpose I came to this hour. So he's going to be glorified in this hour. If I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all to myself. But he was saying this to indicate the kind of death by which he was to die. So if you go back to John 12:23 to 33, it's pretty obvious that when Jesus says the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified, emphasis on the word glorified, he's talking about his death on the cross. Now, an hour is not a reference to 60 minutes of time. That's not what you're supposed to think. We would just say the time has come, right? Instead of the hour has come. Usually. But we might say something like the hour has come in English too, and we wouldn't necessarily mean 60 minutes of time. In John 12, Jesus had just rode into Jerusalem, where he is about to be executed by crucifixion, and he knows that. The time had arrived for him to fulfill his purpose. For this purpose I came to this hour. The time had arrived for him to fulfill his purpose in coming to this hour. So just imagine yourself as Jesus riding into Jerusalem, where you know you're going to be crucified. And you're riding in and you're thinking to yourself, the time has finally come. The hour has come. That's the idea behind this kind of language. There are also several other places in John which allude to this hour as his death. And in John 12, the hour in which he will be glorified is his death. Well, that's really important because that's what's being talked about at John 17:1 and John 17:5. It's his death. That is not going to work for the Trinitarian interpretation of John 17:5, is it? John 12 verifies for us what Jesus seems to be saying at John 16:32. An hour is coming and has come for you to be scattered. Well, it sounds like he's talking about the cross, right? Actually, it's pretty obvious he's talking about the cross. But John 12 makes it even more clear. Yeah, this hour is the cross. And then he goes on to say, the hour has come, glorify your Son. Just like he's talking about at John 12:23. The hours come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Just like he's talking about at John 17:5. Father, glorify me. The Father is going to glorify the Son in the cross. The hour in question is his death on the cross, the hour when he will be glorified. These contextual facts tell us that the glorification at John 17:1 and 5 is his death on the cross. And that is all we need to know in order to be sure the Trinitarian interpretation of the text at John 17:5 is most certainly wrong. It's never going to fit. They are never going to be able to fit their interpretation/translation into the facts or vice versa. They're just going to have to ignore these contextual facts. No amount of fabricated spin doctrine will ever rationally explain how it could be possible that Jesus is praying to have his glory back. That is, Jesus is praying to have his glorification by death on a cross back, which he happened to have alongside the Father before the creation of the world, the Genesis creation. That's never going to make any sense. But that's just one scriptural fact which demonstrates their error. There is more, much more. Another serious problem is how Trinitarians define the word world at John 17:5. They more or less just assume what world means in this verse, John 17:5. And then they sort of expect you to adopt and participate with them in making that same unsubstantiated assumption. But if their assumption is wrong concerning what this word means, world, their entire interpretation and translation of the text is also wrong. And the contextual facts show us it is wrong. If Trinitarians define the word world in verse 11, for example, in the very same way that they define the word world in verse 5, they have an insurmountable problem on their hands. And that's where you can prepare to hear fabrications and spin. It's the routine, right? And then we have other stuff here. And you have to take note of how Trinitarians require the word world to mean two different things in these verses and in the very same sentence. This is especially absurd in verse 14 and verse 18. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Are we really expected to believe that John is recklessly using the same word in two different ways to mean two different things in the same sentence, especially when it says just as in that sentence? It just becomes ridiculous when you really think about this. But that's what they have to do. When they think of Jesus being sent into the world, for example, they think, well, that means Jesus coming down from the heavens up there somewhere, down to planet Earth, something like that. But the disciples being sent into the world means something entirely different. World means something entirely different now. I mean, if the disciples are sent into the world the way Trinitarians think Jesus was sent into the world, well, they must be in outer space at this point, and then being sent down planet Earth. That's just crazy. And that's not to mention John talks about false prophets who have gone into the world. So you have to really think about that and how really crazy it is to have John doing that in one breath. Use the word world to mean two different things in one breath. Like, it's kind of nuts to assume that that's what he would do. Because how are you ever going to understand someone who would write like that? Does he mean this or that? Or do I just get to cherry pick and decide whatever I want him to mean and stuff like that? It's just ridiculous. So a typical solution to their own problem is to insist world means X in one breath, but not X in the next breath, as I've already mentioned. So, they've got world meaning X at John 17:5, but it can't mean that at John 17:11. So it means not X, but Y. And then in verse 14, they are not of, now world has to mean not X, but Y, just as I am X and not Y. You see that? And the same thing with verse 18. Just appreciate the absurdity of that. John makes heavy use of the word world, Greek cosmos, in his writings. In fact, he uses the word way more than anybody else. He also routinely uses the word world to refer to people. And there are many examples. Like, John uses this word about 100 times or more. But you can go check this yourself, and it's very obvious that he uses this word over and over and over and over again to refer to people. Jesus was sent to the people, right? and the disciples are then sent to the people. John 17:18. The people in question are those of the fallen order, which is why John says those born of God are not of the world. Just as you see here in John 17. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Jesus was sent into the world means Jesus was sent into the people. If you honestly regard everything John says by using this word world, this is obviously what he means when he says Jesus is sent into the world. And then Jesus sends his disciples into the world. It's a reference to people. World isn't like a defined, geographical space or something like that, but a reference to the people. When he had finished his mission, which is what Jesus is talking about at John 17:4, he was no longer in the world. And he can say that because it's not a reference to planet Earth. The reason he was sent to the people is done and finished. I was sent to the people to do this. Now I'm done. That's why he could say I'm no longer in the world. And now he sends his disciples to the people, into the world, just as he was sent to the people. And in 1 John chapter 4, we're warned to beware of false prophets because they have gone out into the world, to the people. So here's another thing. Well, Trinitarians might notice this contrast between verse 4 and 5. They're also quite blind to the significance of this contrast. In verse 4, Jesus says, I glorified you, Father. In verse 5, he's saying, now you, Father, glorify me. It's very important to see that. And so another thing that happens is Trinitarians just kind of obsess over these last four words. And obsessing over these last four words, before the world was, it makes them completely blind to everything else that's going on in context. So here's something to think about. What if before, in verse 5, is actually referring back to what Jesus was doing during his ministry, as he mentions in verse 4. So in the Gospel of John, the Son was para, the Father, which means the Son is alongside the Father. Jesus would say, I am not alone. The Father is with me. In fact, he would say, the Father is abiding in me. And you have to remember, John also tells us the Father abides in believers, the born-again children of God. The Son was para the Father during his entire ministry. It wasn't as if, a lot of Trinitarians, and I've seen this many times, they sort of picture this like God and Jesus are up in heaven, and then Jesus departs for planet Earth, and it's as if the Father said, he waves goodbye to Jesus, goodbye and good luck, I'll see you when you get back kind of idea. That is absolutely not what is going on in the Gospel of John. In fact, Jesus explains it's way different than that. So if the Son is para the Father during his entire ministry, that's before, right? That's before he's praying in John 17. He had glory para the Father when he was doing this. John explains that as well. Jesus had glory alongside the Father when he was doing the works of the Father, because those works glorified the Father, and the Son was glorified in them. Jesus explains this. So he had glory para, or alongside the Father, in terms of the works that were done alongside the Father, or para the Father. And he glorified the Father in those works that were done para, or alongside the Father, because the Father is there with him, abiding in him. The Gospel of John just thoroughly describes and illustrates this in a way where if you just don't read John recklessly, it just makes it crystal clear what is going on here in Jesus' ministry between the Father and the Son. The Father is para the Son, and the Son is para the Father. Para means to be beside or alongside, that kind of idea. The Father was with Jesus. He wasn't just back in heaven waiting for Jesus to come home. It wasn't anything like that. So when you look at verse 4 and verse 5, in verse 4, when Jesus says, I glorified you having finished the work which you have given me to do. What if what Jesus says in verse 5, the glory which I had with you before, is referring back to how he had this glory alongside the Father in verse 4? What if these two things are references to the same thing? You got to think about that. It turns out they are. So here's something you can do to help you think. We'll just block out those last 3 or 4 words just for a second here. Just look at that. Just to help you think and see. What if these two things are references to the same thing? These two things bolded in red. And again, what if these two things, bolded in blue, are references to the same thing? In verse 1, that the Son may glorify you. In verse 5, glorify me alongside yourself. So the Son is going to be glorified in the cross, and the Father is going to be glorified in the cross. Verse 1, that the Son may glorify you. And you also see this at John 12, 23 to 32 again. Father, glorify your name. I have glorified it, verse 4, and will glorify it again. The cross. Do you see how all the contextual facts are leading us and essentially pushing us and forcing us in a certain direction? So I put the Greek text up here in kind of interlinear fashion. It is getting narrowed down, isn't it? Now take everything in this video into consideration. And then remember how John routinely uses the word world to refer to people. Just maybe Jesus isn't even talking about reality before creation. Maybe Trinitarians are just way off base out in left field. Have a look at that. It'll get you one step closer. If you consider everything we've talked about, it'll get you a step closer to what Jesus is really saying. What does the Greek text really have Jesus saying at John 17:5? What is this really about? Still can't see the forest for the trees? Since so far you have probably disregarded a heap of contextual information pertinent to John 17:5, you just might want to consider chewing on those facts for a while. That's enough for now. Be careful.